And today we're going to discuss another really mysterious object that a lot of astronomers still have trouble explaining. And in this case, I think it's best if I show you the images of these objects first. Here's what they kind of look like in the infrared, visible by the Spitzer Space Telescope. And here's one of many such objects discovered in the famous Orion Nebula. Although one of the most recent studies on these objects was actually studying this. And so, hello wonderful person, this is Anton, and today we're going to discuss the unusual mystery of these very bizarre objects that today are referred to as proplyds, which is actually short for protoplanetary disk. But in this case, it's actually extremely different from a typical disk because of the unusual cometary shape they form. And the thing is, astronomers have known about these objects for several decades, but initially, for the first couple of decades, nobody actually knew what's going on here, and scientists assumed that maybe these were just some unusual nebula. But then, in the mid-90s, the iconic Hubble Space Telescope was finally able to resolve one of them around a star system known as Theta 1 Orionis C. This is also in the Orion Nebula, and is basically an extremely bright and very powerful O-type star that produces a ridiculous amount of light. It's about 200,000 times brighter than the Sun, and as a result it also produces a lot of UV light, which usually ionizes pretty much everything in the vicinity. And so when this unusual star was analyzed even more, scientists discovered quite a few of these very bizarre cometary objects around it. But in every single case, the cometary tail was pretty much in the opposite direction from the star, which kind of gave us a hint on what's possibly happening here. Because these were such powerful stars, they were basically producing so much UV light that they essentially started to evaporate nearby star systems, producing a kind of a shock wave that would heat up the surface because of the UV light, warming up the gas and the dust inside the disk, expanding the disk in a process, and then basically dragging everything away through powerful streams of ultraviolet radiation. And so in essence, every one of these proplyds was a kind of an ionized protoplanetary disk, with the disk itself being evaporated by a very powerful star somewhere nearby, which basically made them resemble these unusual cometary objects. And today, approximately 180 of these are known inside the Orion Nebula, and we actually know the most in this nebula because it's basically the closest such object to planet Earth. But they also have been discovered in a lot of other nebula, and some even exist extremely close to the galactic center, very close to Sagittarius A star. But sometimes there are actually different types. As a matter of fact, they usually come in at least two different types. Some of them, the ones that are super close to these really bright stars, end up glowing themselves because of the star's luminosity. And this of course also makes them much easier to see. These were actually the first ones discovered ever, just because they produce these unusual glowing nebula. But other ones, the ones that are much farther away, usually show up as much darker objects and are very often extremely difficult to see. But it's these really bright ones that are particularly interesting. Mostly because it suggests that they actually evaporate gas here super fast. As a matter of fact, it looks like these baby stars are losing mass so fast that they technically would not even have any planets left after all of this is finished. Here's roughly what a typical structure of these objects usually looks like. And so in this recent study, the scientists actually wanted to do a much more thorough investigation of the object right here, specifically focusing on how much mass it loses in order to solve an unusual mystery about these objects. They technically should not actually exist. And that's because, based on the observations of the age of the Orion belt, we know that it's at least 2 million years old. But if all of this gas was being evaporated that long, it should have been gone a long time ago. And so here they wanted to calculate how much gas and how much dust is being evaporated inside this object. And so by using modern observations using multi-unit spectroscopic explorer on top of the Very Large Telescope in Chile, they discovered the mass loss of approximately 1.07 times 10 to the power of -7 solar masses, which is equivalent to about 10 millionth the mass of the Sun. And that's every single year. But if this has been happening for 2 million years, should have already been gone. As a matter of fact, all of these proplyds should have been gone a long time ago. Yet we actually see quite a lot of them in the Orion Nebula, and a lot of other nebula as well. And then there is also the question of what actually happens at the end. Do these star systems end up with basically nothing, no planets and not even asteroids, or can they still form something? Right now the observations and the calculations suggest that at the end there should be really no planetesimals in the system, with a lot of these stars basically remaining alone. And that's because most of these stars that are approximately 1 light year away from an extremely bright star end up losing pretty much most of the dust, at least according to some of these models. And interestingly, even the tail here is almost 1 light year long as well. So this is actually a lot of dust and a lot of material. But it's really the mystery of why they're even there that's actually really what we can't answer. If they've been evaporating this material for a very long time, they should have been gone a long time ago, possibly within just a few 100,000 years. Yet we don't actually see anything like this in the Orion Nebula, and we don't even see these barren stars anywhere. And so even by analyzing 12 different proplyds in this study, the ones that do contain cometary tails and the ones that are losing a lot of mass, the researchers still basically found no answer. There's still no explanation for why they haven't been destroyed, and there's also no explanation for why we don't seem to observe the end stage of this particular phenomenon. And despite this phenomenon being relatively rare, with most proplyds just resembling something like this, the ones that do resemble comets are obviously a lot more intriguing. Mostly because we have no idea how all of this influences the evolution of material around these stars, and what all of this then turns into. And because these powerful stars, surrounded by much smaller stars with protoplanetary disks, seem to be actually pretty much all over the place, all of this very likely results in dramatic changes to a lot of star systems. But what exactly these changes are, nobody currently knows. For example, maybe one of the reasons we don't seem to find so many planets around certain stars is actually because they kind of survived this particular process with only a very small disk left at the end. Although obviously this still doesn't answer the question why these objects are still even here, even after possibly millions of years. I mean, maybe this implies that they actually started with much bigger disks, or maybe they're just passing by this star system with a relatively large velocity, and so they only get to experience this for a brief period of time. And so, in a nutshell, there's just no answer yet. But these are still quite mysterious and quite unusual, and definitely have to be studied in order to understand how various planets form around various star systems. But if you want to learn about some other really strange and unusual proplyds, or basically protoplanetary disks that surprised everyone, check out some of the other videos in the description. And so I guess on that note, once there are some answers or someone figures out why these unusual proplyds are the way they are and how they're able to survive for so long, we'll come back and talk more about this in some of the future videos. Until then, thank you for watching, subscribe, share this with someone who loves learning about space and sciences, come back tomorrow to learn something else. Support this channel on Patreon by joining the channel membership or by buying the Wonderful Person t-shirt you can find in the description. Stay wonderful, I'll see you tomorrow, and as always, bye bye.